Okay, thank you to everybody for joining. We're delighted that you could join us for this session on AI's data dilemma, confronting the paradox of poor quality data in the age of AI. My name's Alan Brown. I'm part of the Defence Data Research Centre and a professor in digital economy at the University of Exeter. So I'm going to lead this session, but really what we're going to do today is have a discussion around this topic and introduce some of the key ideas with some experts in this field. But let me first quickly introduce what the DDRC, the Defence Data Research Centre, is all about. We're a transdisciplinary research centre looking at some of the technical, cultural and behavioural barriers to the use of data and AI, within the use of data within AI and data science. And we're particularly, of course, focused in the defence domain. So what we're trying to do is look at some of the ways in which we can improve not just the state of the art, but also the state of the practice in the use of AI and data science in defense. So our work is started about a year ago. We're in the middle of a 3-year program that's part of a defense program supported by a number of organizations. In particular, it's supported and funded through DSTL, the Defense Data Science Technology Lab. And it's being run by the University of Exeter, along with the University of Liverpool, the University of Surrey, and the Digital Catapult. So what we're going to do today is talk about one particular aspect of this, which is to do with the quality of data and its impact on AI. And we have a number of panelists that will be joining us. So I will be part of this and chairing the session, but alongside me there will be Yvonne Gallagher, who's the Digital Director of the UK National Audit Office, Christine Ashton, who is now the Chief Information Officer at UKRI, the UK Research and Innovation Centre, Stephen Crossfield, Brigadier Stephen Crossfield, who's Chief Data Officer and Head of Information Exploitation in the British Army, and Rashik Parmar, who's the CEO of the British Computer Society. So they'll be joining me in just a few minutes. But first, what I'd like to do is just give you an overview of some of the key issues that we face. And from that, we'll use that to drive some of the conversation we'll be having today. So let's think about where we are right now with the use of AI. I started by thinking about putting up some graphs about the importance of AI and how much adoption of AI was increasing, but it's kind of a bit of an insult these days. I think we all understand that. We know what we're going through and some of the implications for the use of AI in all of our lives. I think what we're also beginning to learn is this hangs very much on how we look at the data that we've collected over a number of years, that we're organizing and managing today, and that we'll be collecting and using over the next few years. In fact, what we're seeing with the world moving towards a more digital approach is that digital transformation is bringing lots of new ways of us collecting data, new sources of data, more data delivered more quickly, greater accuracy perhaps in some of that data from places that were inaccessible before. You know, we're getting information about people's lives and behaviors. We're capturing information about their heartbeat, what's going on inside their bodies, where they are, who they're interacting with. And this is being widely shared, used, analyzed, manipulated, traded. So we're in a world where data is becoming a really key resource, driving a lot of what happens. It's bringing many benefits, but as we know, it's also raising a lot of really important questions. We're starting to shift from thinking about data really as a record-keeping, analytical kind of piece of information that we use perhaps for auditing or for compliance, where we're constraining ownership of this data to whoever created it or to a very small number of people or organizations. And of course, the technology we've been using in the past of spreadsheets and databases is being overtaken, because we're moving towards a more data-centric and data-driven view. The data-centric view says we're collecting data from multiple sources, we're making it available through dashboards, we're creating new visualizations, and we're trying to understand how that information drives behavior and helps us to understand situations that are quite complex. There are amalgams of these different data sources. And we're storing those in data lakes and data warehouses and helping us to look at different forms of data in some sort of consistent way. But of course, what we're moving to now and what we're seeing as being much more important for the future is being data-driven. This data is not just historical. It's not just giving us an indication of what happened. It's helping us to determine what will come next, what the future will look like, how we'll make decisions driven by this data that may be automated, that may be inferring new things that weren't originally part of the data set that we had. If we look at generative AI and large language models, we see that in the way in which it generates new information, in which it collects new information, in which it infers what's coming next from the data we've already stored. But of course, we're also realizing that it's raising new issues around its ethical sources, about where we're collecting it from, how we're using it. And of course, we're starting to see some of the limitations of some of the skills that we have in interpreting that data and using it, the shortage of skills, the change in the role that we need in order to drive that. Now, we see this, of course, in the way in which people are applying data today. And I saw this, this survey recently that said, in fact, we could argue that what's happening is people's understanding and use of data is getting worse rather than it's getting better, which is kind of paradoxical with the fact that we've got more data coming from more places that's more accurate. And these sorts of surveys are saying that people are beginning to say, I'm not sure that we've really got a good handle on the quality of the data we have. I'm not sure we understand how to use it in the most effective way. And our confidence about this data, where it came from, how I use it, how secure we are in its use, is perhaps dropping, not improving. So this leads us to a real problem. The problem is, as we go through these digital transformations, particularly in the public sector, but also in the private sector, we're starting to struggle a bit to understand how to make this data as effective as we can in the age of AI. And these sorts of quotes about government lacking a clear and sustained strategic leadership on data, or despite the rising volume of data, we're finding it harder than ever to isolate the insight from that information. These are recent quotes saying, we're really not sure that we're able to take advantage of this data if we can't understand the quality, if we can't communicate effectively around the data, if we can't share some of the skills we need in order to interpret this data in the context of the decisions we're making. So that leads us to today's discussion. How do we get a handle on the maturity of the data and the data practices that we're using, particularly as we're trying to drive operational decisions? What new demands is that placing on us in the age of AI? How can we meet those demands? And do we have the right processes for data management, governance? Do we have the right skills that we're going to need? And how do we ensure the future of data quality as we see many more issues, perhaps around misinformation, disinformation, people trying to manipulate information online and elsewhere? Can we ensure that we're moving forward in the right direction? So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our panelists and to begin our conversation. So let's bring in our panelists into the conversation right now, please. And let's begin our conversation. So let me introduce them again to you. We have Yvonne Gallagher, who's the head of digital for the National Audit Office. We have Brigadier Stefan Crossfield, who heads the data and AI for the Army. We have Rashik Palmer, who's CEO of the British Computer Society. And we have Christine Ashton, who is currently the CIO for UKRI. So if I can, I'm going to go straight in with you, Yvonne. You saw some of the quotes there about government's handling of data and some of the challenges. Maybe we could start right there. How are you seeing some of these challenges around data quality? And where do you think we stand right now as we look at these issues?
Thank you, Alan. I think it's quite interesting because we've produced 2 reports now on the challenges and barriers to digital transformation in government, and that includes the barriers to emerging technologies and innovation. So, and we produced those over the last 3 years. So, and really in summary, the issues in government is that the data resides in legacy systems and in many cases hasn't been kept up to date. It's been collected in silos in different systems across departments, let alone across government. So the quality and consistency is poor. And our reports have kind of urged systemic actions required. But really, you'd have to say that doing something about systemic data issues is not a high on anybody's agenda or priority list. Let's face it, to the average person, data is not exactly a topic that elicits any kind of great enthusiasm. But interestingly, what does excite senior people is the topic of data sharing. And this is where we get all the conversations about the huge benefits it would be to public services of sharing data, and all the benefits are just laid out the whole time. But the understanding of why that is so difficult is missing. And we often hear things like, well, if only government wasn't so, people weren't so risk averse, or they can't be bothered, or any of those things. Whereas actually, unfortunately, it's much more of a deeper cultural issue than behavior. Behavior is not the problem really at all. So, so at the centre, CDDO really have, they've got a mission in their roadmap to try and do something about the data. But they are saying in their recent report, really from end of last year, that there's still huge barriers to standardization. And the other thing that everybody wants to do is create critical data sets. But I'll just leave you with one example. We did a study on the NHS and looked at their data a few years ago. And they were very keen on standards and standardization and what a difference that was going to make. And that they were making using these new data standards mandatory. So in fact, one of the mandatory data standards was to use NHS number now. And NHS number is one of the best government numbers. It's 98.5% accurate, more than NI number or any other number. But the issue is that hospitals and GP practices have bought their own software, and there's a myriad different types of software in hospitals, and not many of them actually have anything where you can hold an NHS number. Right. So retrofitting standardization of data is hugely problematic. So it's back to that simplistic, we'll just do this and we'll just do that. There's nothing simple in this area. So I'll stop there, but this is really the problems that we're finding around data.
It's a great start for us. It's not perhaps the most uplifting start, but it's a great start for the conversation. Stephanie, as we look at one particular example, perhaps in the army and what you're trying to do, are you facing similar issues that Yvonne described, and how are you looking at that today?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. It's great to be here, by the way, and one of the esteemed panel. I feel privileged to be alongside some of these people. So yes, we are, but I think we have a slightly different view on it in defence. I'll speak about army specifically. So some of what I say will apply to defence, but I'm here as the Chief Data Officer for the army and the Principal AI Officer for the army. So whatever I say should sort of be attributed in that way. So quality is an issue, absolutely. The real challenge, though, in defence is this data is second only to our people. Our CGS said that at DSEI last year. You know, I think we have actually in defence recognised the importance of data. It does define a future competitive advantage against our adversaries. You know, using data at the speed of relevance to make better decisions in adversarial situations will define future competitive armies. There's no question of that. I think we can all accept that. We don't really, quality is one element. The other element is variety as well. So we're not into big data, right? So we're not doing the Tesco's Club Card thing. Actually, variety and the aggregation of multiple different perspectives, multiple different data sets is what gives you that insight that your adversary won't get. It's not humanly possible to consider all of the factors, particularly in an adversarial situation, warfighting, for example. So breaking stovepipes down, sharing across the organisation, hugely important. The potential to share across government, another whole step. But I might just in a moment come back to why that is really important, but also slightly worrying. So if you accept that, the balance is, where do you go first? Where do you go to improve the quality of data and break down those barriers? Do we go after having more readiness, more forces available more all the time? Do we use it as an indicator of warning where we might have to go? Do we look at that panoply of information that's out there now in open source, much of it, about what's going on in the world and try and understand how we may be required to react on behalf of the UK? Do we use it for force design? Do we use it for efficiency and effectiveness? There's lots of commodity products, right, that can make us more effective, more efficient. Equipment, stores, people, recruiting of people, you know, those types of things.
Yeah.
But it is an adversarial conversation. So we keep coming back to that. I'm driving an agenda, as is the CGS, the DCGS, all the leadership of the Army around. Let's work out where it helps us be better at what we're doing. So we've just turned that, for my last point, on its head, though. Our adversary sees the same opportunity. Our adversary sees that data as what we would call a threat surface. You know, then there's new vectors in there that they can choose to use to impact on our ability to react quickly or appropriately. And when we talk about, as Yvonne was saying there, you know, sharing across government, if we take just one example of recruiting, for example, in the armed forces, always a challenge, high churn in an armed force, you know, a young person's game, as they say. We need 10,000 people in the army, maybe a bit less, to keep ourselves alive. Having access to some of the data that government holds, medical data, data around DWP, data around education, for example, would speed that process up immensely. But of course, that adds a whole new threat vector into opening up a new surface that adversaries can look at in terms of undermining our ability to react appropriately. So it's a real balance, I suppose, is what I'm saying. But I think in our area, we have recognised the importance. That's the main step that we've made in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, which is really encouraging. Thanks, Alan.
That's a great context and some interesting examples there. What is, Christine, if I know a lot of your experience has been in the private sector with a number of large organizations, and you've acted as a CIO looking at some of these data challenges. From the private sector side, is this common? Is this just a public sector issue? Is it better in the private sector? And now you're sort of also with UKRI. You're only just started there, I know, so it's a little cheeky for me to ask about what you're seeing there. But what do you see in terms of your experiences with the private sector?
Thanks, Alan. I mean, what I would say is, if anyone doesn't know who UKRI is, you know, we're the largest public funder of research and innovation in the UK, looking after 8 billion of public money. So it's a huge organisation. And as we all know, research and innovation is something that's going to power and empower UK economy, and who else knows. And the reason I mention that is because one of the challenges with research is making connections. And I think one of the things that we're talking a lot about today is how you make connections. And I think that from a maturity point of view, how data is mastered for me, and Yvonne did touch on it with the national insurance numbers, you know, how data gets mastered for me is the single most important thing going forward. I mean, public sector, private sector has the same challenges, because of course a lot of the problems we're talking about refer to the how companies came to be formed together. UKRI is no different to you know, a BP or other big conglomerate where they've been formed out of lots of little companies. We were formed out of 9 research councils, for example. So everybody does their own little thing differently. And I think what we're talking about going forward is a world where, you know, the structure of our data can't continue to represent the organizations it was formed in, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yes.
And I think it was Conway's law that said, you know, the structure of systems reflects the structure of the organization that built them. And kind of, I think what maturity has to do for us is to help us to get past that, and also past the fact that as we start to buy more off the shelf and software as a service, we're almost forming our data landscape out of the data models for Salesforce and SAP and whatever. So I think the challenge is the same in either. I don't think it's different, but I think what is important for all of us is to try and find that single root cause, that if you made that better, it would help a lot of other things. And just the last example I would give would be, if you look at years ago, you know, we all struggled and we spent a lot of time digitizing maps. But then we all realized that actually if we had super accurate location data, life would be a lot better. And people like Google helped us to do that. And now, because we've sorted out location, we can do lots of other things. And I think that companies, whether it's public or private, have to try and work out what it is that if they made one thing better or mastered something better would actually lead to other things.
Yeah, driving that outcome-driven approach, I think, is critical. So Rashik, if we come to perhaps the view from either from your experiences back in IBM or your British Computer Society, a lot of this is about professionalism, skills, driving the economy in a broader sense. What are you seeing, and what's your sense here?
Yes, Alan, what I think about here is, as a professional, you need to make sense of what you've really got to play with. And I think when Yvonne said the NHS number is a very accurate number, which it is, 98% is phenomenal. But recognize that 98% means there's over 1 million people's numbers are incorrect, right? and actually, as a professional, you need to understand and interpret what you're seeing from the information and be able to advise and guide the decisions in the right way. So when you look at some of the unintended consequences, it's because we built decisions on layers of inaccuracy, and then there's no surprise that the end result is not what we expected, right? And you saw that in spades when the exam results were given to algorithms, right? Because the data source itself was questionable, right? And so if you're predicting on questionable data sources, then it shouldn't be a surprise that the outcomes aren't what you expected. And going back to what Christine was saying, as long as we can start to make step changes in the accuracy of the raw data, we've got a chance to be able to use these potent technologies like AI in ways to unlock some of the bigger issues. But we've got to recognize that we're never going to be 100% accurate on data. So you've got to be able to build structure in the systems and the professionalism to be able to ask the right questions and make sure that you're using the error correction mechanisms and error detection in the right kind of way.
So I think, you know, going around the table here, we recognize the quality issues, and they're not going away, and we're going to have to deal with quality challenges in the data. We need to think a little bit about how we then use this as the source for decision making and the new kind of AI systems. And we know, even from looking at generative AI and the fact that it's scraped a lot of data from the internet that may or may not be accurate, that may or may not be appropriate to be used depending on your point of view. We understand that these data sources are going to have a huge impact on AI. How do we see the current situation with regard to the newer kind of systems that are going to start to appear over the coming years? Whether that's in the defense domain, where they're going to be already using AI quite substantially, but will be using it much more, whether that's more broadly across government and public services, where the civil service and the government is expecting huge advances because of the use of AI, or in the private sector. How do we see this, and what do we see as being some of the ways forward? So Yvonne, maybe you can start and maybe comment a little bit on what we think some of the opportunities and challenges will be as we look forward to the use of AI with the current data and with new data being gathered.
Yeah, I think so when I said earlier that generally data doesn't excite people, it doesn't, but boy, do the tools excite people, definitely. And now we are seeing such great excitement around AI, and government itself has identified the potential large-scale productivity gains from AI will be huge. But we've just actually, we're just completing a study in the NAO, in the National Audit Office, about what is happening in AI in government. And what we're saying in the report is that whilst the centre's carried out an analysis to identify those potential productivity gains, it hasn't really yet, or really things in the public sector that could be automated. It hasn't examined yet the feasibility of delivering these gains or make an assessment of cost. So I think very specifically, the answer to the question isn't really there yet to say what business problem is AI going to solve for government or public services? And I think this thing with, there's definitely opportunities around, and I think obviously the generative AI thing in particular has excited people. But I think what we're saying in government is a huge environment of legacy data and systems. So with cumbersome processes, now a lot of those activities can speed up and automate those processes. But that is a lot of work. And I think really what the real prize is to identify where's the big productivity gains. And at the moment, I don't think anybody is identifying those, because it really falls into the same thing around government's transformation ambitions. And at the moment, government's hasn't really fulfilled its transformation ambitions because it's a really hard thing to do. It's a huge legacy environment with the data that we've spoken about. So moving to any really radical model is very tricky. It's complex, it's risky. So I think there's two questions in government. It's not really pinned down yet where in these public services the big savings can be made. And hopefully, if there's more of this work now that's going to go on in the next year, we might see more of that. And I think really departments they're the best ones to tell us about that. So how's this going to help benefit system? How's this going to help the tax system to be more efficient and productive? So I think it's really at the moment, watch the space, but it's certainly got everybody's attention. And we're interested to see, but I think we're saying as a community, the expectation is this isn't easy. This is just not something, AI isn't just a tool. It's about how we're going to implement that within the existing environment. Yeah,
well, that leads us, I think, Stefan, you mentioned a couple of things about aiming it towards efficiencies versus aiming towards being ahead of the adversaries. And which might be in more targeted areas. So how do you see this in terms of the challenge of the data being available to do that, us having the right skills to be in place, and as Yvonne was saying, having the right expectations for the outcomes we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Whenever you have some sort of new technology for armies or for defence organisations, that balance is always one of the big challenges. It's always very hard to decide how much of that technology you want to exploit in terms of supporting for an army, war fighting in our ultimate raison d'etre. It's why we're here, is to defeat our adversaries on behalf of the government's wishes, or the government for the nation. So vice the fact that we're spending public money, right? And we should be as efficient and effective as we can with that public money and get the most from it. I suppose what I would say is, generatively, generative AI terms, we're using it already, as a lot of government is. We're doing that with extreme care. We've got really good leadership from the Defence AI Centre and others to make sure, and we have an Army AI Centre now where we do look at this with some care, and I'll come back to what that looks like. But we've been writing, for example, job descriptions. We're completely changing how Pan Defence skills framework looks like, and we've got a generative AI doing 70 or 80% of the job description, and then the human steps in at the end, and it is genuinely human machine teaming. It's human-centric AI. We don't expect it to complete the task, but we do expect it to do quite a bit, making us very efficient. We've got large language models as well now. We're rolling them out. I mean, clearly, there's a lot of history in warfighting, and we draw on it, we study it. Any good profession of arms will look at history, because there's not very much new under the sun. And looking at that through an LLM gives you the ability to extract really precise references from well-curated historical data to allow you to make better decisions about how we go forward. But the opportunity is genuinely across the whole panoply of what we do. We will seek, I think, in the near term to exploit commodity tooling. I've talked about that a bit before, but there's lots of stuff out there that we can generate tooling with now. So we run very large analytic platforms, many of which already have good AI tools in them, which we know we can trust. ultimately we have a white paper, ambitious, safe and responsible, written in concert with the Defence Ethics Panel, lots of advice and guidance from people like Alan Turing's Institute and others, so that, we know what ambitious, safe and responsible looks like. And that's where it gets a bit tricky. Guiding adoption in an adversarial environment where we're using lethal force against an adversary is somewhere where we need to tread, I think, we are going to tread much more carefully. And we all have a really strong eye on governance in that environment. There will be no killer robots, right? The policy is clear. There is a human in the loop. And I think there is a lot of noise and excitement around AI, but the British Army and Defence, the MOD, has been very clear about that. Whether our adversaries are is another matter. And that, I think, is something as a nation we will need to address, because some of our adversaries are large adversaries that are growing in power around the world, and we see this in the press every day, do not approach warfare in the same way that we would, Westphalian, following the rules of war, way. So we need to be a bit careful with that and not be outcompeted by someone who's prepared to have a different view. And I suppose the last bit is, and I think this is slightly to Yvonne's point and some of the earlier points, is where are we just getting betterment, or where are we doing true transformation? So for me, true transformation is doing different, not just better. It's the wheels on the suitcase, right? The classic example. That recombinant innovation that gives you a complete transformation in how you do your business. If I'm honest, I don't see a lot of that at the moment. We're not there yet, but I certainly see this technology, among others, synthetics, quantum, AI combined, does mean transformation for all of us, and certainly for defence. And we've got to also, I think, in the Army, we have Director Futures. That's where Futures is. Futures are in, where is the transformational space? And I'm supporting that, but I don't lead that work. I'm more around betterment at the moment. Yeah, I think that's sort of where we are. So yeah, tricky.
Yeah, so the focus on improving what we have today, making it more digital, making it more intelligent, using data in better ways in order to inform some of the decisions that are being made. Is that what you see, Christine, as being the main focus, and what can we learn about that in terms of what we need to do next? You're on mute, I think.
Always happens. I think it's a really good point, and I can cite an example from UKRI, because one of the things that we want to do is make connections. We've talked about betterment, but also the value in AI is making connections and making them hopefully better, but also faster. And I suppose the challenge you've got, that if we don't understand our base data and understand the extent of it and what it can be used for, what is it good for, as the songs went, then as you scale it, things just get out of control a little bit. And one of the things we've been trying to do is to look at descriptions of research and match those and make connections across other research, right? And the challenge you have, of course, is if things are not described a certain way or definitively enough for the algorithms, the matches become fuzzier and fuzzier and probably more useless as the algorithm can't deal with it. So what we're learning about is what algorithms are good for what, and what algorithms are applicable depending on the quality of your data. But I think what becomes more and more important in this new world as we move into it is not just data quality, but provenance. And being able to put little hallmarks on data to say this came from here, this was how it was created. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. How do you use algorithms? What type of algorithms you use in certain situations, and how does that help you? And I think as my colleagues on this call have said, it's a work in progress, right? It really is a work in progress. And but it also just gives us a bit of time, I would say, to keep educating, keep creating a data culture, thinking about the skills of the future, and really working from there is what I would say.
So maybe that picks up very well, Rashik, in thinking about that educational part of are we learning enough about what's necessary in the people coming into the profession? It used to be that old joke of what's the definition of a professional software engineer. you know, somebody gets paid for writing code. You know, we've got to get beyond that to something that it means more than that. So BCS is at the heart of that transformation, I think.
Absolutely, and I think there's multiple levels of this question. There's a level of the question related to the professionals, the data scientists, the developers, the people that run the data, right, and making sure they're being educated to understand what the best practices are and make sure that they share and learn, because nobody's got a monopoly on being right here. This is as you say, it's a constant journey, and it's learning together and developing together, and that's one of the big things about the BCS. We're a platform where 72,000 people can share that learning, and we can really make a difference there. So that's important. But I think there's also a big part of the equation which we often forget, and it's not just the people that are creating the systems or analyzing the data, but it's also the people that are going to consume the outcomes from that, the results from that. Are they being trained and educated to be able to ask the right questions and be competent in being able to make effective use of that data, interpret it in the right way? I always say there's that journey, and I think we've talked about this before. There's a journey from data to information, information to insight, insight into action, and you can't blame the data for being wrong if you're choosing to ignore the interpretations at each of those levels. And you've got to be very careful that the actions will deliver the intended outcomes, and not scale those actions in a way which can result in unintended consequences. We've seen that with the Horizon IT scandal, right? And we've seen that in how that can hugely impact individuals' lives. As you start to think about automation and how autonomous systems may be able to take some of those decisions at a pace where there's no human in the loop, they may work really well, but when they don't work well, they could be monumental disasters. And from a defense perspective, the kind of race condition where you've got two sets of AIs fighting against each other using, fake data, it could be very, very scary, right? Because you've got unpredictable outcomes there, which could be very, very scary. So I think we need to ensure that there's a level of professionalism at all the levels in the development, the use, and understanding of that, and stewardship of that, so that we make sure that we do get a point where this new set of AI systems can really make the world better.
I think you make some strong points, and if I can sort of think about that and move the conversation towards that, do we have that knowledge, and in particular that knowledge of the implications of data quality, lack of data quality, data interpretation, if we can call it that, in our senior leadership? Maybe that leads us on to maybe thinking about that in different contexts, about where are we in making sure that we apply this in the right way. And Yvonne, maybe I can start with you thinking about the work you've done looking at senior leadership in government. And I know that NAO has investigated some of the implications of leadership in government not being particularly digitally savvy. I assume that becomes even more of a challenge when we add in AI, the importance of understanding where data comes from, its provenance, its quality. Is that what you're seeing as you're looking at government?
Yeah. Yes, and I think we've brought these up in our recent reports. So the issue with skills in government is particularly, and I'm talking here particularly public sector, but I'll be interested in any private sector views on this. But government is really, senior leaders are about managing policy administration. So they have big jobs to do, huge customer services, huge departments to run, and they run that well with all the constraints that they have around the legacy environment that they have. So if you take, why has this department got, this function got 1,000 people in it? Well, mostly it's because here's 5 legacy systems. They've got disparate data in it. They don't talk to each other. We need people and processes to make it do what we want to do today. So you can't just overnight, you can, and I think I like the word betterment. So this is all the time. Are we bettering what is there, in which case you'll be stuck with those legacy systems in that data for the next 30 years, because you can't improve those legacy systems. They're already too complicated, too messed about. They might have one single legacy system might have 50 different interfaces to something else that all need changing if you change a bit on one of them. So they're very rigid. So therefore, what happens around them, you want to build something new, you're building things to make it work, the additional things to make it work.
Yeah.
So it's back to this, the skills. So what we've really highlighted is, do senior management in government even understand this from an operational point of view, let alone have the digital fluency to know how you can move this forward. And I guess not many people, even if you do understand the operational environment, have those skills to know how to move that. So it's not an easy task. So I think what we've emphasized in our report is this is really difficult to do, but it's always treated like it's easy to do. So here's this huge program that we're going to spin up, and it's going to be world-class transformation, and we're going to do it in quite a short period of time. But we don't have the bandwidth or the skills or those things. We might have the money, but we don't have the other things to make it work. So I think that already we say those things about digital transformation. And we're huge supporters of innovation in government, because we see keep just tweaking around this legacy is problematic. But unless this is addressed, so the skills just at a really basic level need to understand that difficulty that is there. And when we are choosing to do, when government are choosing to do something innovative, you really need to know that starting point to be practically thinking about how this is going to make a difference. Is it a tweak? Is it a betterment? Or is it something more radical where you'll really get the cost savings and the efficiencies? So I think at the moment we would say the right data management processes, government and skills aren't there. Yeah. And they need to be there now, and they need to be there to be able to take advantage of the opportunities of things like AI.
Thank you, Yvonne. Is that something you're seeing, Stefan, as you look at the military and in the army? How do you see that skills issue?
I'd love to get all four of us in a room, because I think we could, like, I would get a lot of value from that. I mean, I've taken a lot away from what just been said in that last sort of run, or maybe put a few points out. So firstly, the sort of data, information, insight, action bit. Well, Army's been doing that for quite a while. It's called the OODA loop for us. It's observe, orientate, decide, and act, right? So it's not unusual that we want to seek intelligence. I'll come back to that. That's been going on since Wellington sent his riders out and cavalry was made into recce. Those days were those commanders were trying to find out as much as possible. And the American Civil War is a really good example of that actually as well. Something that Christine picked up on, the data labeling, understanding the provenance lineage, having trust in data is something that we're really working hard on at the moment. So trying to get a single ontology across our data, a logical data model, so that we can then begin to label it in a way that makes us understand how much we can trust it. That's important. That links back to what I was saying a moment ago. For us, there's another layer here. There's the stratification of security. So the fact that we physically separate official sensitive from secret, from above secret, and the agencies have the same challenge. That for us, we are driving up that pyramid, as we do more aggregation. So as you put more data together that gives a bigger picture, it becomes more advantageous for an adversary to have that image. We've pre-aggregated it, right? So we've put the right bits together. We've done the jigsaw. Now they know what the picture looks like. The pieces of the jigsaw are useless until you put them together. So aggregation, labeling, getting away from physical delivery, so going for a logical separation in the future, label the data, really dynamic ability to say it's secret now, it's above secret now, it's nothing now. Because data has there's there's a perishability to the adversary's desire to get after it. And so, you know, we've just got to get better, quicker at that. Data moves more quickly now. It used to be quite static. I just want one on education skills before I sort of finish on intelligence. So I was briefing our board recently about our skills plan, Project Techni. We're working out how we're going to upskill the organisation for a digital age. So moving from an industrial age to an information age army. Brilliant. And I said, you know, we've got digital natives flowing into the bottom of the organisation. And a number of the board members pointed out that they were flowing into an industrial age environment, which is, you know, everywhere is a legacy system. We're in a brownfield site. We have tremendous obsolescence, significant stovepiping, the same as all of government, right? We're all trying to solve those problems. But those digital natives aren't able to bring those skills to bear often because, you know, they might have gone through a digital schooling pathway. They might be able to code, but there's no facility in a legacy organization to do that. So it's good that they're coming in, but it's also a challenge. I don't think we'll get AIs fighting each other, by the way, anytime soon, which is the other point, but I'll leave it at that. So my last point is, I suppose, that if commanders always sought information, because war will remain a dangerous and visceral affair where it's a battle of wills, a competition between humans, that is not going to change. Clausewitz is not going to be, you know, countermanded in any way in the near future. So commanders always want intelligence, but there's been a limit to how much commanders can observe and how much they can compute. How much, you know, you can get overwhelmed, and we've already seen that in the sort of end of the Cold War, going into sort of network centricity and the American model. You know, there's just too much in the network. There's too many sensors, too much information. We're coming into an age, though, where machines can help with that. But a commander needs to trust the machine. You know, commanders do this a human endeavor predominantly at the moment, or staff do it with a commander. So trust is key. So when we talk about intelligence, intelligence is inherently labeled to be trustworthy. From the moment we gather it, the way it's managed, the way it's flowed through the organization, you know where it came from, you know its lineage, you have, you know, its provenance, confidence in all those things. But the rest of our data isn't. And so we're dipping in now for the first time in a generation into data that hasn't been curated in that way, hasn't been prepared, and therefore commanders don't trust it. And I get that, and I'm the same. You know, so what we've got to do is get to a point where we can label the data, build the provenance, have confidence in it, and then the tools can really begin to allow people to look at much broader span of information or data to make better decisions. So it's a really interesting time at the moment. But, and as a last point, my senior leaders have absolutely got it, because they're all commanders inherently. They know the power of data, and they're on my back the whole time. So I think, you know, we're over that hurdle. We're not trying to convince them it's a good thing. It's now making sure we can make it trustworthy going forward, particularly AI, but other things as well.
Thank you, Stefan. You raised a lot of interesting points there, and there's a couple of things in the chat too, which are talking about the challenges that we're going to face perhaps as we go to the polls. Many more countries going to the polls this year. The misinformation, data being manipulated in various ways. So as we come to wrap up this conversation, maybe we can just do a final little comment from each of you, just talking about how you see where we are today in relationship to what we see coming next over the next 12, 18, 24 months around this AI use of data, the challenges that we've expressed about some of the larger scale issues, some of the systemic issues that perhaps we face, particularly in the public sector, but also elsewhere. And maybe if you could just give a sort of final comment, final thought to the people listening in about where we are and what might be coming next. So maybe we can just carry on the conversation in the order we were. So Christine, would you like to go first and give a few final comments?
Well, yeah, I think it's been an amazing conversation. Lots of things come out of it. But you know, one of the phrases comes to mind, which, remember, we used to talk about garbage in, garbage out. I mean, what we need to be careful of is that we don't have even faster garbage in and garbage out, you know, going forward. So I think we've got to really think about that. We also know that a lot of these projects can't scale and people struggle to scale them. I kind of think that even though we think about AI as probably a bit futuristic and all-encompassing, I think taking a step back is going to be the way to tackle it. And also, rather than trying to think about experience and omni-channels and things, think about some very specific use cases for it. In financial services, that's one of the things that's been really successful. Just think about using it for onboarding accounts or opening a certain type of account and learn from it. And I think that's something that's come across from this whole conversation about, it is about learning. It's about learning for all of us. And I think don't be afraid to, like I say, take a step back and maybe look at some very specific closed use cases as a way of proving it and thinking about what that means for data and how you scale.
That's really helpful, and I think the audience will find that really helpful too. That focus on something very concrete rather than getting too carried away too early. Rashik, how about you?
Yeah, so I think 3 things I take away, and I think the conversation has been fabulous and lots to learn from all the guests you've got here. I think the 3 things I would say is, firstly, we have to shift from a blame model to a learn model. And this blame model is actually getting in the way of a lot of what we're trying to do here. And the more we can establish a peer-based learning model, the more likely we are to get good outcomes. The second thing is how we build trust and retain trust is a really, really important topic. And Stefan brought that up multiple times. Government intelligence is trusted because they protect that trust. They put structure and process around that to make sure that you can trust it. Today, we don't have that. And how we build trust in the kind of AI systems that we depend on is going to be really, really important. And that leads me to the third point, which is we've got to think about having the right kind of skills and expertise for the kind of systems that we're building. And we've been advocating for the need for professionalism and regulation around some of this. I think there are a class of systems which are critical to humanity, critical to a nation, critical to an organization. And for those, you do need to have professionals who are proven and chartered, maybe, or whatever you want to call it, that are licensed to practice, and you can trust them. So I think if you go through those layers, you move from blame to learn, build trust, and then have real professionals that you can trust, then I think we can move forward.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you, Rashik. Yvonne.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think as far as government is concerned, I think the overall, so whilst government may have their ambitions may be somewhat world-class, unrealistic at times, what they do is, and what they end up doing and the results they end up with aren't risky. So I think it's not a caution. It's not about being cautious or worried that government might be doing something with data that they shouldn't be doing. I don't think that really is the problem. I think the problem is more around expectations rather than what they might do with the data itself. And I think in departments, a lot of this, it's led in departments and generally in departments in the operational areas, they do understand their data and they do understand their existing services really well. And to some extent, that's where it's more of a constraining and a pulling back rather than they're going to go too far. But I just think my other point is the understanding about there's 2 types of data here. And with public services, it's the personal data that really needs a different level of treatment to other types of data that you can more open type of non-personal data. Often doesn't matter if it's not 100% accurate and what it's doing for decision making or illustrative purposes. So I think that still applies going forward, rather than there's a whole caution around every type of data or every type of activity.
Thank you, Yvonne. And Stefan, and one of the comments that you might also just address as you finish your conversation is that a lot of what we're doing is dealing with uncertainty. We don't know what the future is going to look like. And that's certainly something that you're experiencing. So maybe as you wrap up, just a comment about dealing with that uncertainty.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, so if I look to the future, I suppose Again, I am talking about the army, but it does reflect into defence and maybe a little bit more broadly. But firstly, regaining authority on the sort of ontologies around the data. We've slightly lost control of it in some areas. That's not a criticism of my predecessors. That's just been that people hadn't realised the value of that asset, and we need to regain control on it and start applying common ontologies, pattern standards and guardrails to the data, so that we know that it's all in that format. The second thing is, going forward, we need to govern with care. I think it was just touched on. There are some areas that do require detailed governance. If we're talking about applying Nash equilibria to a complex game theory scenario where we're fighting an adversary with multiple different variables, we need to govern that very carefully, because that's a really hard thing to do. Academia, still struggle to get more than 2 moves ahead of their adversary in chess. We are not going to compute the billion, trillion versions of a future outcome ever. So we're always playing game theory. That needs governing really carefully. But if we're working with predictive maintenance around a data set that we trust, we can just trust it. Planes, trains, automobiles, buses, everything is using that now. Why wouldn't we use it for tanks, aircraft, in defence? So govern with care, only where it's needed. And I agree with the PII point that was previously made as well. If it's personnel information, it's clearly sensitive, and even more so given the adversarial point I made earlier about threat vectors and how useful that would be to an adversary. Right. I think everything we need, your point about going forward in uncertainty, we have a check which I apply quite frequently, and my team do. Are we preparing for the next 2 or 3 decades, or are we preparing for next year? Because we need to put the underpinnings in place now for the next 2 to 3 decades. What we don't need to do is code in drama later. That's my only concern. And then lastly, just get some balance around the negatives and the positives. I think it's the point made about make people intelligent customers, train them to say there are really good sides to this and really bad sides to it. And what you need to do is do that balance. TikTok isn't always right, kids, as I keep telling them. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. You need to be the intelligent customer and make a decision about its provenance and whether you want to believe what you're seeing. And if you should be naturally curious in that respect. That would be my last closing comment, if that's worth it.
I think it's a great comment to close with, about being curious, about being careful, about making choices, and about understanding there's a balance to be struck here. And we're all in the middle of trying to understand how we do that in a world that's changing very quickly. So I'd like to thank you all for the conversation. It's been a wonderful conversation. I really hope people have gotten a lot from the conversation that we've had today, but we can also continue the conversation online. You can find us at the Defence Data Research Centre, ddrc.uk. Just find us online, contact us, and we'll be happy to forward any questions you have, and also to address that from the DDRC itself. So again, thank you to Yvonne, to Christine, to Rashik, and to Stefan, and thank you to everybody for taking part, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks all. Thanks, Anne.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.